Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll just wait a few moments while everyone trickles in before we start. There should be a poll, a Slido window ready for you to answer the question on which purchasing practice created the biggest challenge for your business this year. This will help us understand who's in the room and sort of help guide the conversation as well. So definitely encourage you to answer the poll that's just in the Slido. And just for everyone joining, we're just going to start in a little under a minute, just while everyone joins in slowly. So thank you for joining us. Feel free to answer the poll that's there next to you, so then we can help frame the conversation. Just a quick question on which purchasing practice created the biggest challenge for your business this year kind of helps ground the conversation in terms of the research that Cascale and Better Buying have brought out. So that'll be up for just a little bit longer. So encouraging everyone to fill out the form when you can, the poll when you can. And otherwise, we'll just begin in a few short moments for everyone trickling in now. Hi, everyone. Starting in just a moment. All right, I think we're ready to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Innovation Forum webinar. Thank you all for joining us on, I hope, morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. So I have four fantastic speakers joining me today, where we're going to be taking a hard, sort of honest look at how purchasing practices are shaping supplier resilience, especially in light of the volatility of the apparel sector, but obviously the wider political climate. And we'll be using the Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index as sort of our backbone or anchor for this whole conversation. So we'll explore first about what the data tells us, and then look into more detail on what suppliers and brands are doing on the ground. So just to kick us off, we'll have Katie, head of product at Better Buying, part of Cascale, doing a bit of a presentation. And then we have Mobeen at Soorty Enterprises, Naurin at Crescent, Bahuman, and Susan at EILEEN FISHER joining us as panelists. So throughout, if you're new to Innovation Forum webinars, we like to spend a lot of the session on Q&A and what's important to you as the audience. We know you've been working in this space for quite a while, or you're interested or just beginning, but really we want to make this important and interesting and valuable to you. So as we go through the full session, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A. We dedicate a lot of the session to Q&A, so please do ask your questions there, and we'll turn to them as soon as possible. So ask them throughout, and then I might weave them in throughout, or just spend a little bit at the end on them. We have four fantastic speakers joining us, so really a good opportunity for you to ask any of the questions that you have for it. So, and just as a reminder for everyone that's been joining recently, we have a poll up that we'd love for you to answer. It's a question on which purchasing practice created the biggest challenge for your business this year. It'd be great if you could, it's probably like multiple, but we've not let you answer multiple. So just add whichever you think is the biggest, and then that'll help us ground the conversation. But I'd love to just jump right in. Katie, from your side of Better Buying, I'd love for you to sort of introduce yourself, Better Buying as a whole, for anyone that might be aware of it. And then if you could give us a sort of initial overview of why are we here today? Why is this an important conversation to have? What brought us here? And then what are the challenges and how do we relate this to challenges of the world, and how do we relate this to buying practices? So over to you, Katie.
Sure, thanks. And thanks everyone for joining. Happy to be here, excited to have this discussion with all of our panelists. As Tanya mentioned, I'm Katie Hess, head of product Better Buying at Cascale. For all of you who aren't aware, Cascale acquired Better Buying at the beginning of this year. So we've had a great year of kind of understanding the Cascale tools ecosystem, how Better Buying will fit into that, and then focusing on, okay, now how can we scale? How can we scale Better Buying within the brands and retailers? And how can we scale Better Buying with suppliers? This webinar is mostly focused on the results of our Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index, which takes place in April and May. And we have a little bit of data from our Partnership Index, which takes place in October. And I'll get to the data in a little bit, but I think the biggest focus here is around kind of what 2025 brought on the industry. From our vantage point here at Cascale, it really was a real world stress test on purchasing practices. So We saw a lot of rapid sequence of shocks to our industry. There were steep tariff hikes and more tariffs over again, or at least the threat of tariffs. And then duty changes, the de minimis closure, logistical delays. Buyers were constantly in a state of recalculating. And for suppliers, that really showed up in or as operational instability. A lot of the forecasts were changed late or more frequently, and order volumes fluctuated. And we saw a lot of this show up in the data, and I'll get to the data in just a minute. I think the data also shows that US buyers were hit especially hard because of the tariff environment. We have a little bit of data that shows that as well. And then we also have, in all of this, some promising statistics. Companies that had some of those stronger fundamentals in place actually performed pretty well this year. And we'll get into that a little bit more as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, maybe we go straight into it then. If you could give us a little bit of an oversight on the research you've conducted, and what these implications really look like. And then after that, we'll turn to the rest of the panelists to kind of reflect on that and understand from brand and supplier perspective, what does this look like in practice? So go ahead, Katie.
Okay, great. Jump in here, share my screen. And there we go. Okay. So before we dive in, I mentioned a lot about the better buying data, but before we dive into the better buying data, I think we need to ground ourselves in what suppliers are saying more broadly. So this survey from Vogue Business highlights the gap pretty clearly, that we're hearing strong verbal commitments to long-term balanced partnerships, but the day-to-day reality of that isn't always aligned. Most suppliers, as you can see here, have reported that they're carrying the cost of sustainability alone with little to no financial support from their brand partners. And for when we're looking at this isn't really just about sustainability. It really signals a broader pattern of responsibility shifting downstream, and something that we've also seen in the better buying data. So to put these findings into context, let's take a quick look at the two surveys. I mentioned them briefly, but Cascale's two better buying surveys provide a complementary view of purchasing practices. These surveys were developed with suppliers. They're free for suppliers to participate and complete, which is really important. They're completely confidential, completely anonymized, and they're focused on not being just another compliance audit. We really tried to flip the script and allow suppliers to rate the buyers on their purchasing practices. So we have the Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index, or the BBPPI. So the longer acronym is our larger survey. This is our annual deep dive analysis of purchasing behaviors. It's grounded in objective supplier reported data across 7 key categories, those same key categories that were just voted on in the Slido poll. And this is the report that we recently published and we'll be referencing throughout this webinar. The Better Buying Partnership Index, or the BBPI, is our shorter pulse check. So this allows suppliers to evaluate the quality of their relationship with buyer companies. And our most recent cycle closed in October, and we have a little bit of fresh data that I'll share with you in a moment as well. And together, these two surveys really give us that full picture of purchasing behavior and supplier experience. Okay, let's go to the next one. So suppliers this year were pretty clear about what drove instability, with many describing sudden order shifts tied to tariff changes. Others highlighted those logistical delays that we were referencing, and it really made production planning extremely difficult. Several emphasized that when volatility arises, collaboration becomes really the only buffer. And these lived experiences are the backdrop for some of the patterns that we see in the data in the PPI. So here's our overall results. You can see that this year's volatility exposed weaknesses across nearly every purchasing practice category. Most categories saw small but broad declines. The steepest drop was in planning and forecasting, which fell 3 points. Forecasting is it's often the first behavior to destabilize when those external conditions shift, and that's really what we saw this year with those tariffs and fluctuating demand. So even though the overall score movement might look modest, the underlying patterns reveal some meaningful strain across the purchasing process. So we're going to dive into some of these specific categories. First up, planning and forecasting. So suppliers reported receiving fewer forecasts, forecasts coming in later, and lower accuracy compared with prior years. This is really what happens when buyers are constantly recalibrating, rebooking orders, responding to rapid policy shifts. And then because that forecasting really underpins every other purchasing practice, some of those ripple effects were pretty significant. Next, if we take a look at cost and cost negotiation. So we saw declines in the percent of orders where prices were fully covered, or if prices fully covered the compliant production. And suppliers shared that they experienced more negotiation pressure as well. So things like compressed timelines, requests for price holds despite those increased inputs, and more rounds of negotiation after prices were agreed upon. And when buyers are navigating those sudden cost shocks, pressures often get pushed downstream, and that's really what suppliers reported this year. Now, interestingly, sourcing and order placement was the only category to see an uptick this year. It was a slight improvement, but that improvement does signal that some buyers were able to strengthen elements like purchase order completeness and basic sourcing coordination. But even with that small improvement, sourcing and order placement remains one of the lowest scoring categories overall for better buying. Suppliers still reported challenges with the purchase order accuracy, as well as significant month-to-month variability in order volumes. Both of this, both of these really create strain on workforce planning, strain on efficiency, strain on cost. So while that increase is encouraging, the fundamentals of sourcing and order placement are still pretty fragile. It's a small improvement, but in the context of this volatile sourcing year, it's not yet a sign of stability, but it does highlight how much opportunity remains for improvement. Okay, so let's take a look now at how some of these pressures landed across regions. When we look at the BBPPI results across regions, we see pretty clear and meaningful differences in how suppliers experienced buyer behavior this year. Oh, excuse me. So some reported stronger performance across multiple categories. For example, if we look at Central and South America, they consistently scored above global average with stronger results in planning and forecasting, in costing, and in order placement, signaling a more stable and coordinated buyer behavior. By contrast, regions like Western Europe and South Asia saw lower scores across several categories. This includes weaker forecasting, more variability in orders, and less consistency in operational coordination. So these patterns reinforce how uneven the experience of buyers can be depending on where suppliers sit. And it's also a reminder that the slight increase that we saw in SOP, sourcing and order placement, overall doesn't tell the whole story. Some regions improved meaningfully, and some others improved in or moved in the opposite direction, did not improve. For buyers, these regional differences surface a critical insight. So purchasing practices are not applied consistently across global sourcing teams. Identifying and addressing these inconsistencies is often the first most actionable step toward improving supplier experience. Now, I mentioned we have a little bit of fresh data from our October BBPI, so our partnership index cycle. And when we look here, we saw a consistent pattern in how suppliers rated US based buyers compared to non US buyers. So at the top of each of these graphs on the left are the US based buyers, and beneath those are the non US based buyers, and then on the left versus right on the right graph. And so you can see that suppliers rated non US buyers higher across most partnership behaviors. And we saw some of the biggest differences in areas like providing enough time for all processes, operational efficiency, and overall business stability. So while the partnership index doesn't necessarily measure the direct impact of trade policy, the broader 2025 context helps explain these differences. US buyers were operating under a far more complex tariff environment with multiple rounds of increases, as we mentioned, those shifting duty structures, and then rapid recalculation of costs. And that level of volatility can really translate into tighter timelines, last minute changes, and less predictability for suppliers. So then when we look at the non-US buyers, they generally experienced fewer tariff-driven disruptions, allowing for more stable relationships and more consistent partnership behaviors. So this is encouraging news. So even in a volatile year, companies with those strong purchasing fundamentals continue to improve. And we see that clearly when we look at some of our repeat subscribers. So this chart shows three companies that have participated in Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index for three consecutive cycles. So over that period from 2023, 2024, 2025, each company improved, some modestly and others quite significantly. One buyer you can see here improved by more than 10 percentage points in that time frame. The overall takeaway here is that when, as I mentioned, buyers commit to those consistent measurement and year over year engagement, we really do see real measurable progress in their purchasing practices. The organizations that really lean into the data, that understand where they are strong and weak, and that actively work with their suppliers perform more consistently, even in a year like this one. So looking a little bit deeper at these repeat subscribers, the behavioral improvements become even more meaningful. So subscribers show stronger forecasting discipline. You can see here in the graph on the left, compared to an industry average of about 35% of suppliers receiving forecasts 120 days in advance. These companies perform considerably better, and that means they're really giving suppliers earlier visibility to plan, secure materials, and manage labor. Suppliers also reported a 100% yes rate when asked whether these suppliers reserved production capacity in advance. And that's a major contributor to stability and efficiency. They also outperform on fair financial responsibility, including sample development compensation. And all of these are really measurable changes in practices that suppliers really say matter most. And they reinforce an important point. So the survey doesn't have to be a static report, nor should it be. When the brands actually use the data with their suppliers, behaviors and outcomes change. And beyond the data, I love this quote. Suppliers are also articulating what effective partnership looks like during this volatile year. So this was directly from one of our reports, and it highlights exactly that. So optimism, transparency, a solution-oriented mindset. It reflects what we see across repeat subscribers. Those strong fundamentals paired with strong relationships really create the resilience that we're looking for. It's also a reminder that responsible purchasing practices show up in the day-to-day experience of suppliers and workers, in timelines, in capacity reservations, and in how buyers behave in times of turmoil. And that is our data. Tanya, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. I'm already like we can see already how this conversation is going to pan out for the next sort of 40 or so minutes. So just as a reminder, as Katie has just ended, if anyone has any clarifying questions or points that they want to raise to those listening, please ask it in the Q&A and we'll get to it. we're going to go through each of the speakers. And then basically from the poll, what I'm thinking is that this kind of guides the rest of the conversation after those opening remarks. So from the poll, it seems like in question of which purchasing practice created the biggest challenge for your business this year, it kept moving. I was watching it, so we're really not in complete agreement. So I can assume that a lot of people wanted to select a few. But the top ones are cost and cost negotiation, planning and forecasting, and then a win-win sustainable partnership. So we'll go into those in a bit more detail. But if there's anything else that anyone want to cover, please do let us know in the Q&A. But Susan, if I can turn to next, the sort of the brand representative here, if you could introduce yourself, your role at EILEEN Fisher, and then kind of talk us through what does your relationship as an organization and brand look like with suppliers? You know, EILEEN Fisher is known for your long-term relationship-based sourcing. So if you could talk us through a little bit what that looks like for everyone listening.
Thanks so much, Katie and Tanya. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Scow. I've been with EILEEN Fisher for 4.5 years, and I work on the full spectrum of social and environmental sustainability, both supporting our suppliers and then also in our internal strategy. And we have actually been working with Better Buying since 2018. I'm super grateful for that. And I realized when I was helping EF recertify as a B Corp last year, our average supplier relationship is 8 years old. We have a sweater supplier who we started working with in 2006. So next year is our 20th anniversary. And I actually was just reminded by one of our tier two suppliers that this year is our 25th anniversary with that dye house. So just so much rich work that's been done in the supplier relationships before my time, even that I'm really lucky to be able to come and play with everyone. I think that the use case for better buying that everyone imagines is, oh, you're a massive multinational brand. You have hundreds of tier one suppliers, and you need this data aggregated and anonymized so that you can reflect on your practices, right? But I think for us, our supply chain is a bit smaller, and we have really close relationships between our sourcing team, our design team, the social consciousness team, which I sit on, and the suppliers. Like we've been at each other's major life events. We chat outside of work. And so I think that in that case, it may be harder sometimes to provide work-related feedback. Like, hey, you guys, you did a really bad job with forecasting for this season, right? You don't really want to say that to your friend. So in that case, better buying is a great way to collect some of that feedback and go through it together on our teams.
Right. Yeah, so we can talk through some of the forecasting as well. But then if could you talk us practically, like how do you use then, for example, the better buying feedback that you receive in practice to understand, that health of that relationship and how does that then change the dynamic and how do you use that data?
Absolutely. So try to keep it simple. I receive the report every year and I sit down with the product development team because they are tracing the flow of the product throughout that development process and they understand which levers we're failing to pull in time, right? For our internal practices. Maybe we haven't gotten through a particular process quickly enough to provide the supplier the information that they need. And so, when I'm walking through the results with them, they're saying, oh, yes, I can see how that happened. I think it's connected to this, and I'm going to chase it over here, right? So we go all the way through all of the lovely data and visualizations that Better Buying provides, and pick a few key themes that we want to pursue and correct for the next go around.
Okay. And then you mentioned, or could you talk for anyone listening that's like, I want to get involved in this whole system, or I want to get involved in better buying. Could you talk us through how that relationships first started between EF and better buying, and if there's any pointers to raise at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me personally, my first experience with someone at Better Buying was actually with Dr. Marcia Dixon. We were on a panel together at the Cascale event, the first conference after the worst of the pandemic in Singapore. But our relationship, like I mentioned, actually started back in 2018. So I had to ask Amy Hall, who's no longer with the social consciousness team, but she sits on our EILEEN Fisher Foundation, and she actually founded this team in 1997. And she said said that she was close friends with Doug Kahn, who was the human rights leader at Reebok at the time, when she met him, and he started talking about like this radical idea that he had developed with Dr. Dixon, right? How do we hold up a mirror to brands and help them understand their own practices through feedback from their suppliers? And our team at the time was just really taken with that idea of radical accountability. And, I just think like one, they were trying to work on getting things on boats instead of planes, right? So even like, the human rights impact, the worker well-being, the time, especially for like sample sewers, that sort of thing, that's like very self-evident. But then I would also encourage folks to think about the environmental sustainability benefits of using their better buying feedback, because it can really help you refine your product development process and get things on boats instead of planes. So that was a big impetus in the beginning, the close relationship between Amy Hall and Doug Kahn, and just the pure respect in the industry, and that idea of radical accountability to the suppliers.
Great. Speaking of, Mobeen, if I can turn to you next, if you could also introduce yourself and your role at Soorty. And then, yeah, if you could take the perspective of a manufacturer supplier in this, how do you feel that purchasing practices from buyers have felt on the ground in recent years? Give us some real world, tangible feeling of what that looks like. And then where have you seen positive shifts, but then also where are still the bottlenecks, where are still the issues, the challenges? Talk us through it, Mobeen.
Thank you, Tanya, and hello, everyone. So I represent Soorty Enterprises. I'm the for ESG, CSR, and corporate communications. Overall, my view within the company is to incorporate more and more social and environmental consciousness, not just in the context of how the West sees us, but within the developed world itself, or developing world itself. And before I answer your question, there's something really interesting that I noticed in Katie's presentation, which was that 16% of people didn't answer or preferred not to answer the survey. And I wonder why. Because I think if I was to place, I am in the shoes. There are certain reasons why we wouldn't. Sitting here today, having this conversation, commenting on how buyers perform or what their intent is or what their practices are, it's a very scary situation for any supplier. It's a very difficult shoes to be in. You can, because brands are, I mean, what is a brand except reputation? And this is core to what they are and what they do beyond the retail shelves. So if you say the wrong word, it has real repercussions for organizations and manufacturers and people like us. So I just want to, put that out there. The way that 2025 started off for us, and I just don't mean just Soorty Enterprises, I mean the entire sector, was that out of the blue, we were struck by this.
Mobeen, I think we've lost you. Can you hear us? Uh, I think maybe we'll get back to him. Naurin, are you able to finish the sentence, do you think? We were struck by. Um,
Yeah, so I mean, while like Mobeen was talking about that, not just a supplier, generally, not only, and of course the brands included, we were definitely struck by the unexpected, decisions, impact of the tariff impositions and all that. So initially, the perspective or etc. was of obviously shock and all, and so still because it took a little while, a few months for the for the rates to finally settle where they are currently. So there was this whole, kind of mentally thinking, oh, so maybe there is some hope for us, based on a specific country, wherever a specific supplier is. So, for example, I work with CBL, which is a denim supplier from Pakistan. So looking at not only just what the tariffs, how they will hit us based in Pakistan, but also looking at our competitors. What's happening in Bangladesh, what's happening in China, what's happening in Egypt, etc. And then, towards August or so, like, kind of a little sigh of, of not relief, but at least, like, okay, this is where we sit. It's 19% for us, it's 25% for that, and this and that. So, and then, of course, looking at how do you, what impacts, etc., would be on us. We still waited because in the sense that the actual cost, we had a lot of discussions internally what the actual cost could mean for us as a supplier. So we was again in that state of confusion, not being able to plan, things getting paused, any major investments that we had planned, for example, on sustainability to install a rooftop panel, solar, water project or something. Everything kind of came to a standstill. It's like, let's just wait and see how this plays out. And most probably we will know by the end of the year, roughly speaking. And now that we are, so I'll go back to Mobeen and let him finish, and then I can build on further from here since he's back. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Am I audible? All right, so I
Yes, we can hear
apologize.
you.
I'm not sure. It was tragic. Okay, so I was just saying that so 2025 started off with that great event of tariffs coming in. But what that really resulted on the ground, and I'm just talking about one sector, one city, and one country, was 16,500 people losing their jobs overnight. That's a huge hit to any kind of sector, any kind of livelihood, any kind of society. And not all of them have been rehired to date. And that's the kind of volatility we're talking about, and that is basically for us what volatility means. So one, there's this, omnipresent, ever, impingent sense of volatility, and then there's the sense of limited, kept at our arm's length kind of camaraderie that we have. There are certain buyers who are extremely conscious about what is to be said and whom it is to be said to, and then there are certain buyers who are not, and we have to deal with both realities. So we have one foot in both of these boats. Um, so I guess that would be my response to what it feels like on the ground.
Yeah. Thank you, Mobeen, and thanks, Naurin, for jumping in. Um, Maybe, I mean, to keep framing the conversation, like if there were some, to everyone listening and everyone in the room, what is it that you would like to see from brands, retailers to make this relationship truly work better? If you could have a sort of a call to it to everyone in the room, and if you have any specific examples of where that relationship has worked well and why that has worked well, is it a specific person that was brought into the conversation, or was it a specific approach to the conversation? Any sort of practical examples of where that's worked well and why would be great. Mobeen.
So
Sorry, that was
one
all
of
for
the
you.
things that has worked well is to have people. Yeah. So yeah. So one of the things that has worked well in the past has been talking to new kinds of sourcing professionals who also happen to be sustainability professionals. So, and that's my key takeaway for 2024 and 25, that in many cases now, the person who places the order, manages the order, and deals with your sustainability and your support is the same person. And that has worked beautifully where it works. Uh, where where it has worked also is now that even within buyers, your sourcing team and your sustainability team, just because of the spread of the organization and the complexity of what a buyer or retailer is, sometimes don't talk to each other. So where these two teams talk to each other is also something that has really worked well. Uh, the relative challenges of legislation, whether it be the European Union's legislation, there's a slew of these legislations, or whether it's the kind of increasing and then decreasing scope of US legislation. It is very difficult to be a supplier and to found legislation and requirements that are ever changing or that are made without you in being. Just look at the word compliance. What does it mean? It means, don't think, throw your head down and just do what I'm telling you. So that's not a really nice way of, talking to your partner. Uh, but even then, there are um, retailers and brands within the world who have not, in many cases, feel the kind of problems that we have in our part of the world, and work with us in order to find those common resolutions. And they've put their money where their mouth is. So, but there's not enough of these kinds of buyers. That's the main problem right now.
Thank you, Mobeen. The audio's still a little bit off, so I'll turn to Naurin for just a little bit, and then maybe we can hopefully have it fully working. I mean, there's already great questions coming in from the audience, but first, Naurin, I did want to give you the opportunity to fully introduce yourself, so thank you for jumping in. But fully introducing yourself, if there's anything that you want to say about your role. And then you've been working with Better Buying Survey for a while, so I think it would be interesting to hear from your perspective, specifically with the survey, and then we can talk more widely. How has that looked like of administering the survey, and then after this sort of decade, I think that you've been working on this. Have you seen that relationship sort of changed within your network? So, what changes have we seen? Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. So I've been in the industry for almost 25 years now, and I currently work as an advisor with CBL, Crescent Bahuman Limited, a manufacturer based out of Pakistan, for the last 7 years. Overall, in terms of my journey within the fashion sector, I've worked with brands, I've worked with multi-stakeholder initiatives, and I've worked for a couple of years with Better Buying as well, and in administering the survey with the suppliers. And happy, of course, today is a very critical discussion that's taking place. And you just mentioned, of course, my experience working, and this is like, at least a couple of rounds of surveys that were conducted with the select suppliers, and select brands, etc. But I want to go back, first of all, to what Mobeen was saying, that what has worked well, generally speaking, when you look at it from the perspective of suppliers. So for me, I think one of the things that has worked for us is engaging with our peers and our fellow suppliers and looking at some of these issues collectively. And this does not just mean that what do you do with them, but to understand them. What does it actually mean for us? All these requirements that have come in terms of traceability, in terms of due diligence, the upcoming legislations, etc., what this could mean for a supplier at the end of the day. While brands, of course, will be obligated legally in their respective countries to report, etc., but how does it trickle down to the suppliers? So one thing that we have really benefited from is engaging with each other. So we've had some loose conversations and discussions, WhatsApp groups, etc. And recently CBL has joined this, and I do want to talk a little bit about that. Take the opportunity, a small think tank set up by the suppliers for the suppliers, Fashion Producers Collective. So one thing is, of course, as a supplier, we continue to be led by the brands in terms of sustainability goals, what the strategies brands have, and then what the implications are for the suppliers in terms of investment, in terms of commitment, etc. But to truly understand, taking a step back and trying to see and what sort of capability do we need going forward. So that has been quite an eye opener for us, and so that I think, in all honesty, is working well for us, and we look forward to continuing to work together as suppliers for that. Coming back to the better buying tool, so the way I look at these surveys, etc., while of course, generally speaking, it's a it's a pretty big set of questions, around 50 questions, etc. But I do think that this is a tool, obviously, that has been made for the brands, keeping brands in mind. And brands commit to it. They are the subscribers, and then they enlist their suppliers to participate. And again, the emails go out. The suppliers have to, and then, as when we were administering this survey with a group of suppliers, we had to constantly chase, get people to fill it out, helping people understand what this means. Some brands definitely, including, and I do want to call that out, EILEEN Fisher, help prepare their suppliers for that. And there were a couple others. But generally speaking, the suppliers were not prepared. So again, who ends up in the organization filling out that survey? Generally, it may not be just the sustainability team. It may be a combination of a marketing or external communications person, and both of them sitting together. And I do still think that it is a very reflective, perception-based methodology. And I'm actually quite interested and intrigued to see now that Cascale, this particular tool, sits within the Cascale platform, what Cascale could do with it. And especially coming from a supplier perspective, is there an opportunity for suppliers to kind of give their feedback and see how we can, if I may, restructure or modify or enhance this particular methodology? Because what this this survey has been conducted over the last 9 years now. So we have a lot of information, and that, my apologies, but that information is nothing new. We know, generally speaking, what the issues are. The challenge is, what do you do with those issues? So can this be turned into something that is actionable, that can be tied into some accountabilities, having those conversations? So what the next phase of it, or the evolution of it, what that could be. So I think that's a space that, if suppliers given an opportunity could have a role to play in that, that would be something, I think, a bit of a game changer as well. So, so that's just, generally speaking, very, very broadly, my experience working with the tool, and then just observing how it, plays out when it comes to supplier experiences.
I mean, we were going to get to it, but Katie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything at this point on any of that.
Yeah, I think Naurin brings up some great points. I was taking notes as you were talking. I think there's a lot that you covered there. But in general, I think you're raising the exact right questions. This perception-based methodology, I think our shorter survey is around perception. Our larger survey is less around perception. It's more with the objective data, but there is a certain perception that's still tied into it. But I think, and Mobeen touched on this as well, is suppliers aren't going to participate unless they feel prepared, unless they feel protected, unless they feel confident that their input is actually leading to something. And one of our priorities, I know you mentioned you're excited that better buying is part of Cascale. We are as well. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to scale, as I mentioned, and to really strengthen that full feedback loop. So to ensure that when that supplier is participating and providing that rating, that we're not just collecting the data, but we're making sure that suppliers see how it's being used and how can we further help drive accountability. That is one of the main focuses that we have. As far as you mentioned, whether there's an opportunity for suppliers to help shape kind of the next evolution of it, and absolutely. One of the main focuses for next year is really to do just that. How can we provide information back to suppliers? How can we make sure suppliers are feeling that impact? How can we provide reporting back to suppliers? A Better Buying was originally built with supplier input, and it might be a time right now where we need to evolve it and relook at, the information that we're collecting, and what is that opportunity to kind of formalize even more of the supplier input? Is there a supplier advisory group? Is there a regional pilot? Is there other, co-designed improvements to the survey that we can incorporate? And then, lastly, I think you also talked about kind of what do we do with the information, and I think that that is really critical. It's you know a survey isn't going to be beneficial if it's not put to use. And so what do we do with the data? And so we need to, as Cascale, as Better Buying, we need to create some clear expectations for buyers and provide that support to buyers, to be able to help them build that real accountability across the industry.
Yeah. And maybe, yeah, Susan, I was just going to turn to you. There's also a few questions that have come through, but yeah, if you wanted to add anything at this point,
I'm so sorry. I just got really excited while you were talking
go
as well,
ahead.
Naurin. We're so cautious about what we ask suppliers to add in terms of initiatives or assessments, but definitely one of our criteria is initiatives providing space and like room for suppliers to be able to talk to each other and work together. I think that Cascale's Manufacturer Climate Action Program, MCAP, is doing a really good job of that. And it's actually allowing suppliers to develop their own climate goals based on science rather than the brand, the customer coming through and saying, cut your emissions in half by next year. It's what is the science saying and what's appropriate for that supplier. The suppliers get to work together and talk to each other. And then outside of the Cascale ecosystem, wanted to shout out Rise as well as really centering supplier voices and having working groups where suppliers and brands can sit together. So just wanted to mention that and feel free to move us on from there, Tanya. Sorry.
No, this is exactly what this conversation should look like. I mean, there was a question from the audience on what are the big, I dare anyone in the audience to not ask a non-anonymous question, by the way, and I'll get to your question first before any of the 10 anonymous ones. But there's a question on what are the big changes non-costing that buyers can make to be a genuine partner for suppliers. So I wonder if there's anything that you can share with anyone in the room on that.
Yeah, I would love to answer that one as well as invite my co-panelists to answer it. So, the one metric that I have watched the most for my own personal performance in terms of like what kind of business partner am I to the suppliers, is the clarity of social and environmental expectations. And I agree with you, Mobeen. I hate the word compliance. We don't really use it. We don't have like a code of conduct. We have social and environmental implementation guidelines because we just don't like the idea of like talking down to the supplier. But I've been watching that one because I think that the more clear and the more simple my communication is, the more time and bandwidth and like mental headspace, right, that allows my supplier partners to have. And then that also translates into money, right? I know the anonymous commenter asked about cost, not including cost, but I think that if we can communicate clearly and simply, we can save them time. And that time directly translates into money, especially in a manufacturing environment. So that's been my number one personal KPI from Better Buying and would invite the others to answer as well.
Yeah. Mobeen, do you have any thoughts on that? What can buyers do to make this partnership work even better?
I do actually. I think that buyers can be more generous when it comes to hearing a no, and because it's simple. I'll give you an example. Most of the parts of the world that I'm from, shifted towards solar power starting about 2020, 2021, 22, 23, depending on, what kind of investment portfolio everybody had. And this year, we started getting interest now, not just on, social compliances and environmental Hague-based reporting, but on more concrete forms of, what kind of product profile or LCA documentation can you share with us? What kind of emissions are related to this? How much solar have you put in? How does that figure into the equation? But one thing that has consistently happened is that for us and for many of my competition within my sector, buyers have arbitrarily put in, starting dates. This is where we're going to start measuring you from. For example, 2023 January. Now, what that means for a supplier like me is that anything that I put in before January of 2023, which is in many cases quite a lot, just simply gets washed out, right? And I know personally that many of my colleagues from different organizations, just like mine, just went through with it because they didn't know how their buyer would react if they were to say no. And because I have been lucky that my buyers have been slightly more generous, and I have said no many times now. Uh, our, starting lines have been shifted to 2024 or 2023 and or whatever it is that, works for both parties. But that kind of conversation has been able to take place. And that's really the fundamental part of it. You can build all the studies and all the surveys that you want, but if you cannot converse with your partner, if there's no doorway to have this kind of conversation, it won't work.
Right, Naurin.
Yeah, so building on what Mobeen said, and this is something that we have observed as well, and we hope we are, in a way, we are seeing and we are hoping that this will continue in the coming years as well. Because, and I think one of the biggest reasons we think this might be happening is that, at least some of the big players or the brands and the buyers have started to realize that, while all these goals have been set, but in terms to how to achieve them is something where those conversations need to take place now, because the progress on the achieving of those goals has been severely lagging. So we see now there are more opportunities that are opening up for that kind of a dialogue. But I think for that to happen, some of the suppliers have been more bold in terms of picking up some of those conversations directly through different forums and anonymously most of the times. But at least, in safe spaces, they've started to speak up. And so this is, but then of course there's the question always is, how do you do that? Because as a brand, you have hundreds of suppliers, to say the least. And then how do you, going back to Mobeen's point, when you shift the starting point, for example, to achieve your emission target. So the baseline years have shifted recently for some of the brands. So unilaterally taking those decisions. So that means what you're doing is that you're punishing the early adopters. How do you account for that within the system? Because you do want to encourage. So how do you, but then I think a lot of time the challenges are that for a brand, again, going back to that in terms of the number of suppliers that they would have, they like to have a unified approach. They like to have something that is scalable, something that is manageable. So in order to simplify things, you end up losing so much in terms of the progress that could be made, because you're trying to fit everybody into one box, and that cannot happen. So that is a lot of work. But what we're trying to do as suppliers is that we can carry some of that load, because the investment is ours, the risk is ours. So as a business organization, we want to be able to have that say for the right reasons, in the sense that if we are able to achieve that specific target, whatever that is, then obviously it feeds into the big pot. The brand achieves its target as well. I think some of the brands have been bold enough to start to listen to their suppliers, and not just, but then I think in terms of its scalability and the ratio of it definitely needs to grow.
Yeah. And sort of on that, when, they wanted to make it manageable, scalable, there was a question on, when brands are putting together their 2030 targets, how involved are you from a supply, like in planning that? At what point do you get involved or at all? Just so you say like that sharing of load. Are you involved at all in any of the planning? No.
No.
Mobeen, also not.
So,
Or
I got an email on it once that, this kind of conversation will happen. This was about a year and a half ago. It hasn't happened yet, but that's pretty much how involved I am.
Yeah. Well, maybe Susan, from your side, it's funny, there's a lot of questions that have come that I had in my notes. So one of them was, how do we encourage more Susans? Which is maybe a bit meta, but is there anything that you can share on well, do you bring suppliers into the planning? And if so, how does that work? What have you seen as the benefits of it? Like, is there anything that you can share on like this has led to X, Y, and Z? It has created improvements in X, Y, and Z that you can share? And then second on, who do you get involved internally in these conversations and how do you communicate that internally to make sure that those benefits are then understood?
It's actually funny that we're having this conversation now because I've spent most of this year resetting our science-based targets because our first set of science-based targets are expiring this year. We hit two out of the three. Tentatively, we'll announce that once we finally get all of our carbon data for this year, right? The year's not over. But we are setting new science-based targets to 2035. We did chat with our suppliers throughout the process, but generally, I think we realize that so many of the levers for decarbonization are ours to pull, right? And anything where we have expectations of the suppliers, we're going to assist financially. I think it's so important. When you have an expectation, you put your money where your mouth is, right? So that's been an interesting thing. I think like the process of resetting our targets, there is no formal inclusion of supplier voice. It has been casual just because we have these, relationships and we want to talk about it with suppliers. But maybe, I would encourage all brands listening, do find opportunities to let your suppliers know what you're thinking in terms of your carbon targets or any other targets. And in terms of encouraging Susans, I would just say if you know anyone in sustainability this year or even in apparel generally, please give them a hug. It's been a tough year. Um, I think like the main thing is I've benefited quite a bit from the mindset at EILEEN Fisher, which is like understanding that we don't always do everything right. We haven't arrived. We know what we don't know, right? And like approaching the supplier relationship with humility and the understanding that like, hey, sometimes we mess up and we're committed to this and we're going to keep coming back to you and keep working through whatever issue. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Katie, did you want to add anything
Yeah, I
at this
just,
point?
communication comes up a lot in our surveys as the most important factor. So I think building on what each of the other panelists said, that is really important. And something else that we hear a lot, and kind of along with the how do we find more Susans, is really aligning internal teams at buyers and having that start with senior leadership. So having senior leadership really treat purchasing practices as a business priority and not just a CSR initiative. And it starts there, creating cross-functional KPIs across brands and retailers so that suppliers aren't getting those mixed signals from the different departments that they're working with. So that's something that has come up a lot. And then I know we're nearly at time. There's a few questions that have come up just around accountability mechanisms and how can suppliers give honest feedback. I just want to emphasize that better buying is completely confidential. While suppliers are invited by the brands to participate, suppliers can also participate without being invited. So it's completely confidential. The brand will never know whether you participated or what you said or what your score is. And I think that that's really important because I hear often that suppliers are looking for some sort of mechanism to really share their honest feedback and opinion. And I just want to let you know and reemphasize that better buying can be that tool for you, and that as better buying and Cascale, we're then responsible for helping close that feedback loop and share that feedback back with buyers.
Right. I might ask you, Naurin, at the same time to do closing in a sentence or less,
Right. So just
basically.
very quickly, thank you. I think that's it. So building on absolutely what Katie just said. So one of the things I do want to see in 2026 and going forward is that suppliers are asked a lot of times after things have happened, after decisions are being taken, can we find a space for suppliers within the governance structures of some of these platforms, some of these initiatives and all, because to take feedback, to take input after decisions are taken, we want to be in the same room, and I think a lot of us have the capability, have the obviously interest, the will, the intent to do it, and so we want to be part of of the conversation while before the decision is being taken. So that would be my ask.
Perfect. We might need to close up. These conversations the time always disappears. But it just shows the importance of continuing this conversation. And this is not at any point the end all be all of this. So really encourage everyone to continue the conversation offline with each other. Just like my colleagues posting in the group, we will be continuing them as well in person this spring at our two conferences in the US and New York, and one of them in Amsterdam. And they're all held under Chatham House rules. So just to note, because basically all questions were anonymous, we really do encourage to have open and honest conversations. So conferences are held under Chatham House rule to try and make that happen. So no press or media there. You'll see a few of these familiar faces at the conferences. So an opportunity to continue the conversation. But yeah, this doesn't stop there. Please continue being honest, and I really appreciate the candor of all four of you. And thank you, Naurin, Mobeen, Susan, Katie, for your insights. We'll share the recording and everything with everyone. But yeah, get in touch if you have any questions. And we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everyone.
Thank you.